Dana Harris Seeger. Welcome to my studio at Visual Philosophy. Today's topic is a brief intro into color theory and how I use color in my work. If you haven't already, you should check out my color theory and watercolor intro class that will go very in-depth into all the basics of color theory, using additive versus subtractive color, all the different schemes. But I wanted to give just a little bit of how I use it in my own work so that you can see it on a practical kind of level. So I have several examples of some ways that I use color, and this is very interesting because some people, in fact, historically, color wasn't even taught in art school. It was thought that it was like you were born with this ability to either use color or not. But again, over time, they discovered that yes, there are theories behind color and there are rules and laws and ways that you can use it if you understand the basic principles. And that's what that class is all about. But there is a lot to be said for experimenting and personal taste and how color makes you feel as an individual. So this, again, is just how I like to use color, and it might be completely different from the way that you feel like you want to use it or feel comfortable using color. But I have, again, some examples, and you can see in this print, I have basically what's called an analogous color scheme. I have blues, a little bit of purplish blue, and some pink, and then black, of course. So by that I mean that they're all next to each other, kind of on the color wheel, if you remember that from first grade. And so they have sort of a common thread. There are punches of different color. For instance, I like to accent like an overall scheme. If there's a lot of blue grays going on, then I'll punch it up with either a brighter version of that color or one that has a little bit of contrast. But this one is still basically in the same sort of vein or side of the color wheel. And what's fun about using different materials and media, for instance, the paint versus the screen print, is that in addition to color, you can get different textures and intensities. So the watercolor will give sort of a softer version of even the same color. So this is black, but it's a screen print, so it's very rich and graphic. And the hand-drawn elements here that are also black are very soft because they're a different material. So keeping an image in a consistent or similar color family is helpful often if you don't know where to start, because it limits you and then you don't get so overwhelmed with using a lot of color. For instance, in this piece, there is a lot going on. There's this greenish, this bright Viridian green, there's sort of a purplish blue, there's this pink and orange and dark bluish black. So there's a lot going on. And in addition to the colors, there's also transparency and opacity. So with different materials, such as watercolor versus oil paint, you can achieve different blends of the colors. And in this section, you can see how the pink has been made transparent so that some of the undercolor, the blue, shows through and blends into another color. So this is one way that you can use a limited palette, but get a multitude of different colors. Without specifically blending the two together, your eye tends to create that other color because of the transparent quality of the paint or material, whatever you're using. And this area here is completely covering over the undercolor because it's opaque and there is not a lot of transparency. So I like to use a combination of opacity and transparency to either cover over or punch up an area and then soften or make another area kind of hazy or sort of transparent and translucent. Wasn't super happy with the way that the colors turned out in this one. Again, sometimes you just have to experiment and see. They're not my usual colors, especially this bright green. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So it's fun to try, especially in different mediums. This is watered down acrylic paint. And the yellow that I originally started with got covered over by this greenish blue. And in some places I'm drawn to it, but in some parts I feel like it turned a little bit more neutral than I wanted. So that's something to pay attention to. Not every piece is going to be a masterpiece. In fact, one thing I recommend is using like a sketchbook to do either color swatches or little color studies. See whatever material you're going to be using, how it's going to interact either with transparency or opacity. The sketchbook is really helpful, even if you don't ever refer back to it, just the process of doing it, failing or succeeding, making notes of that, it will get embedded into your brain and you'll be able to use that in future works. In this encaustic piece, I wanted to show you a little bit about the transparent and luminous quality of encaustic paint and color. Again, this is a little bit more of an analogous color scheme where there's a limited palette. There's sort of yellows, a little bit of purplish, and this reddish maroon, and then a copper down here. So they're all kind of feel warm, they feel similar. There's a lot of layering, and the repetition of the same color kind of helps to bring it all together. If you have a lot of random colors that just kind of go everywhere, then your viewer's eye tends to bounce around and there's nothing to gravitate towards and grab a hold of. So repeating your colors is a really helpful tool to kind of get that consistency in your composition. And when I'm looking at a piece and I feel like it might need something, I often think about, does it need an accent color? Is it too similar? Do I need to put a punch of pale pink here, or maybe even bright blue? What's that going to do to my viewer's eye as they're looking around the painting? And this is a give and take process. Sometimes you might start out with an idea of how you want the piece to look or feel, and then as you go along, you might need to change some things. In this piece, it was getting a little bit dark and similar in value, which is another element of color: hue, value, intensity. And so I needed something to kind of contrast with all the similar value, that sort of middle tone happening. And I used this pale sort of white grid paper as a contrast so that there was something different that didn't just get mushed into the same plane. So now I have elements that are overlapping and different values, which adds visual interest. And then last, I have this piece because I like the color scheme that I used, which is on the complementary side, I would say. There's strong oranges, a little bit of yellow, and then this sort of greenish blue. And if you think about the color wheel, red, orange, and blue, green are opposite each other. So I would call this a complementary color scheme. And there's different versions of each of those main colors. So again, there's like a yellowish, which goes along with the orange. And then there's this sort of greenish, pale greenish grid paper, and the collage that go along with that sort of teal, blue, green. But overall, every color that I used, with the exception of the black, is in those two ranges. And even this print that I attached to the top, which is sort of a brownish, is actually a combination of the two. It's orange and green mixed together. So that kind of helps to link it as well, while these brighter colors, kind of draw your eye back and forth, let you bounce around, but also having that stability of the similarities of the color I find very helpful. So those are just some of the ways that I like to use color in my work. And you can experiment, you can try something new if you feel like your colors are getting a little formulaic or like you're not excited about them. Pick up your sketchbook, try something different, try to mix some colors, try to throw in a color that you wouldn't normally use. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it may not, but it might lead you down a path that you hadn't expected, and that's always a good thing.